Next, we have The Fall of Bataan by Sepi, Andrino, and Romualdez. First, on December 29, 1941, General Masaharu Homa, who was the commander in charge of the Japanese Imperial Forces during the first battles for the Philippines, he served in the Philippines from December 1941 through August 1942. So, he ordered the bombardment of Corregidor when he learned that General MacArthur had transferred his headquarters from Manila to Corregidor. So, it was General Masaharu Homa who ordered um to like throw bombs in Corregidor since he knew that General MacArthur is distributing his soldiers throughout. That means he knew that General MacArthur's forces is not that tight. So it was his chance to gain victory by throwing bombs at the corridor. Next, we have Mayor George Vargas. For 1890, he was a Philippine politician. He was also once a head of the Civilian Emergency Administration and Mayor of Manila. In 1941, he was appointed to Secretary of National Defense. He cautioned the people not to offer any resistance to avoid more destruction. But then, the Japanese is really, orders for destruction. On January 2, 1942, the Japanese entered Manila. It was not on January 2, 1942 that literally the Japanese entered Manila, but it is on this day that the Japanese occupied whole Manila since Manila is declared an open city. Next, we have President Franklin D. Roosevelt. He ordered MacArthur to proceed to Australia to ready the Allied armies for a long road back. He thought that it is a good thing to order MacArthur to proceed to Australia, but then it was not a good decision. Next reporter, please.
Douglas MacArthur was an American leader who served as a general of the Army for the United States, as well as the Field Marshal to the Philippine Army, especially during the World War II. On 11 March 1942, during the World War II, General Douglas MacArthur and members of his family and staff left the Philippines. Inside of the Corregidor and his forces, which were surrounded by the Japanese, they traveled in petty boats through stormy seas patrolled by Japanese warships and reached Mindanao 2 days later. From there, MacArthur and his party flew to Australia in a pair of Boeing B-17 Flying Fortresses. Ultimately, arriving in the Melbourne by train on 21 March. In Australia, he made a speech in which he declared, "I came through and I shall return." And the person behind MacArthur nga nag-order niya na he will be going to Australia is President Franklin D. Roosevelt. It's because President Franklin was afraid that the Corregidor will fall soon and MacArthur would be taken as a prisoner, so he ordered that. After the struggle to save the Philippines from Japanese conquest, U.S. General Douglas MacArthur still abandons the island fortress of Corregidor under the order of President Franklin Roosevelt. And there was 90,000 American and Filipino who are left behind. During the journey of MacArthur going to Australia, he was informed that there were far fewer Allied troops in Australia that he had hoped na mutabang sa iyahang troop nga nabilin sa Philippines. And that time, he issued his statement sa press that he shall return. So that was the origin of his famous line that I shall return. Next. 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 Thank you. And General Jonathan Wainwright commanded the American forces in the Philippines during World War II, became a world symbol of resistance to Axis in the siege of Corregidor and during 4 years in Japanese activity. When General Douglas MacArthur left Bataan for service in Australia, Lieutenant General Wainwright became the senior field commander of U.S. and Filipino forces in the Philippine Islands, holding off a major Japanese assault in January, earned the American Filipino forces the nickname Battling Bastards of Bataan. And it is also President Franklin D. Roosevelt who gave the authorization to Wainwright to continue the fight from the island of Corregidor. Wainwright chose to continue fighting with his men despite sa mga advices na biyaan na lang niya yung troops. Despite also na gamay na lang nilahang food and armas. Next. Edward Postal King Jr., who was a major general in the United States Army who gained prominence for leading the defense of the Bataan Peninsula in the Battle of Bataan against the Japanese invasion of the Philippines in World War II. Edward Postal King Jr. also became the commanding general of the Philippine-American forces in Bataan. When President Roosevelt ordered General MacArthur to leave the Bataan for Australia on March 11, 1942, General Wainwright also acquired command of all the U.S. forces in the Philippines and King became the commanding general. They succeeded in capturing Mount Samat, a major observation post and artillery station, but unable to continue fighting kay insufficient na lang ilang armas and also ilang nutrients kay luyan na kay sila, and they also faced the diseases which were plaguing his forces. General King, afraid that his men would be annihilated, he disobeyed the orders from Wainwright and MacArthur to counterattack the Japanese. Instead, he surrendered Bataan on April 1942, and this was the largest surrender of a military force in the U.S. military history. Thank you.
Inhuman treatment of war prisoners left indelible imprint in the minds of survivors and witnesses that our event came. Along the way, 200 American and 19,000 Filipinos died. The 56,000 war prisoners that reached Camp O'Donnell's Capas, Tarlac were held like animals, and 3/4 of them died of starvation, sickness, and torture. Next. Next, you have Hukbalahap by Sinadhan and Hortelano.
So, Hukbalahap was a common guerrilla movement organized during World War II. So, Hukbalahap, it means Hukbong Bayan Laban sa Hapon, and it was formed on March 29, 1942. The Hukbalahap initiated a hit run and offensive against the Japanese forces and whose guerrilla forces fought as a patriotic freedom fighters.
So, in October 1941, in the province of Nueva Ecija, isang buwan bago sakupin ng mga Hapon ang Pilipinas, ay itinatag na ang Hukbalahap. Ang Hukbalahap ay isa siya sa mga samahan ng mga farmer, mga guerrilla na pinamumunuan ni Juan Pelayo, isang leader ng mga magsasaka at miyembro ng Partido Komunista ng Pilipinas. And at that year po, ay nag-utos na rin ang founding chairman ng Samahang Komunista na si Pedro Abad Santos na palakasin ang pwersang gerilya sa Pampanga at inutusan nito ang isang nagngangalang Luis Tarok. So si Tarok ang namahala at siya ang ginawang supremo sa Hukbalahap. So in the year February 1942, nagkaroon ng conference ang samahan na sumusuporta sa komunista, kabilang na dito ang samahan ni Pedro Abad Santos at Juan Filehio. Layunin ng pagpupulong ay ang makabuo ng strategy kung paano nilalabanan ang kasulukuyang pananakop ng mga Hapon. And sa conference nila is nakabuo sila og strategy kung saan nila pag suko sa mga Hapon. So nakuha sila tulo ka buok. We have sa military, political, o ekonomiya. So sa military, nagplano sila na to have a surprise attack sa mga Hapon. Tapos sa political is gusto nila ipaabot sa mga tao nga na ay democracy. Ipakita nila sa mga tao na mayroong demokrasya sa kanilang pamamahala upang masira ang kasalukuyang ipinatutupad ng mga Hapon na isang puppet government. At sa ekonomiya naman ay pigilan at tuksuin ang mga kasundaluhang Hapon sa pagnanakaw ng mga kayamanan ng Pilipinas na kanilang kinukuha. So, palibubasa ni Luis Tarok kani.
So, Luis Tarok is the Hukbalahap leader and provided the vital informations on Japanese strength and military plans and sent it to the headquarters of MacArthur in Australia.
So, ito siya din. Then, kanang nilubusan ng pinasok ng mga Hapon ang Pilipinas ato, tas, di ba, kaya na may mga pan ato, kanang mga American spot. And then, they're planning nga mag-combine sa mga Americans. Tas, ang Hukbalahap di ay mag-combine sa Americans. Tas, tagaan sila, nagkuhan sila silang MacArthur. Tas, gi-provide ang taog mga pusil. Then, gitudloan taon sa unto paggamit. And then, tungod kay iba ang paniniwala sa mga lahiyang pagtuo sa Hukbalahap, dili para ang pagtuo sa Hukbalahap ang sa US, mao to nga wala sila nagdugay ng ugnayan, wala sila gisuportaan. Kay ang nakawitness pud sila nga dili pod maayo ang pamamalakad sa Hukbalahap, kay usahay na sila sa pilitang pagkuha ng mga lupa ng mga mayayaman, mayamang may-ari upang ipamigay sa mga magsasaka. Then, it is said na nagtutorture din sila ng karaniwang tao, nagnakaw din sila ng mga kayamanan. And then, we have this babae kaning si Felipa Kulala, or also known as Commander Dayang-Dayang. Siya sa kanang mga babae na leader po sa nakig-away po sa mga Hapon. Kay ang mga babae po sa una kay kabalo na po sila makig-away kay gusto sila makabalo sa mga Hapon kay gina-torture sila manggod. Tas mo to.
Next, Jeff. Next slide. So, Barrio United Defense Corps. Tarok and Huk leaders develop a village defense forces. It was given the task to protect the villages, enforce law and order, promote anti-Japanese sentiments, and deny the enemy to access to food and logistic support. So when war broke out and Japanese occupied the Philippines, Tarok and other Huk leaders, including Pedro Abad Santos, the founding chairman of the Partidong Komunistang Pilipino, and other Hukbalahap leaders, they developed a village defense force called Barrio Defense United Corps. Defense Corps were loose-knit local units composed of 5 to 15 members. It is formed, and the purpose of it is naturally to protect the villagers, to provide and enhance the law and order, to promote anti-Japanese sentiments, deny the enemy access to food and supplies. The Corps also provided bases for hook recruitment, intelligence, and logistic support. So, acting to the BUDC, Tadok established governments to run the daily activities of the villages. So, the BUDC had separate departments to administer recruitment, intelligence, transportation, communications, education, sanitation, and agriculture. Although instructed to avoid direct conflict with the Japanese, the council organized public efforts to limit Japanese support, sought out local traitors, and administered the law as they saw it. So,
That's all.
next reporter.
Next, we have The Puppet Government by Vasquez and Butley. Okay. Since wala si Vasquez, ako na lang magbasa sa iya ha. So, who is the puppet government in the Philippines? So, kinsa daw ang mga puppet government sa Pilipinas? So, sila si Benigno Aquino Sr., Jose Laurel Jr., Jose Pasiano Laurel, E. Garcia, or CCLH, on March 9, 1891. November 6, 1959 was the Filipino political and judge who served as a president of Japan, occupied Second Philippine Republic, a puppet state when during World War II from 1943 to 1945. Next. So, when was the Republic of 1943 or puppet government inaugurated? So, in October 14, 1943, in ceremonies in front of the Legislative Building in Manila, the new republic was inaugurated, and Jose P. Rauler, the chairman of the preparatory committee, assumed office of the president. Next. So, why is it called puppet government? Technology mission. The term is a metaphor which compares a state of government to a puppet controlled by a puppeteer using strings. The first recorded use of the term puppet government is from 1884 in reference to the Caliphate of Egypt. Next. What type of government was in the 1943 Constitution? The Philippines is a republican state. The government established by Constitution shall be known as the Republic of the Philippines, or SEC. Next. So, what was the puppet government in the Philippines? Proclamation of Philippine independence and inauguration of Republic of the Philippines. Puppet government then is all industries, facilities, banks, schools, churches, printing presses, and theaters were supervised by the military authorities. The circulation of the American dollars was banned. Next. Balik. Immediately after the fall of Manila, the Japanese High Command established a Council of State with an executive council to carry out orders formulated by Japanese military administration in the country. Okay, next.
The Japanese also proclaimed that their aim in the invading of the island was save the Filipinos from the bondage of American imperialism and make Philippines as part of the Greater East Asia prosperity spheres rather. So the Japanese and nag-create sila og Council of State kauban sa Executive Council to handle the military administration in the country. So the Japanese island wants to point the island as the Filipinos from the bondage or being slave of American imperialism and to make the Filipino as part of the Greater East Asian co-prosperity spheres. Next. December 14, 1941, the Japanese military administration was created. The executive committee was manned by pro-Japanese supporters headed by George B. Vargas with 6 commissioners, namely Benigno Aquino Sr., the common Antonio de las Alas, the finance, Jose P. Laurel, the justice, Rafael Alonan, the agriculture and commerce, Claro M. Recto, the education, health and public welfare, Quintin Piradis, the public works and communication, and Jose Yolo, the chief of justice. Next. Talibapi. The Japanese abolished all political parties formed during the Commonwealth period and had been replaced by kasipanan ng paglilingkod sa bagong Pilipinas. Next. Asians for Asians. Japanese imperial forces promote its policy of attraction in the Philippines through the platform of Asia of Asians, which is popularly known as Greater East Asia Prosperity Spheres. Next, in September, in September 20, 1943, the Japanese puppet government, through the leadership of Jose P. Laurel as president and Benigno S. Aquino as speaker of the unicameral National Assembly under the Philippine Second Republic. Next. Local government was also recognized. Manila, for example, was enlarged to include the neighboring towns and renamed City of Greater Manila. Next.